Oi oi, it's your boy, the Yusuf Zalal of Only Thoughts That Are Halal, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC Apex Trash, Cannonier versus Rodriguez. And I do have to say, shout out Cannonier and Rodriguez for putting on a fight that was well beyond what this card would lead you to expect, and probably what this lineup deserved. They really did. Them big boys was banging, is what I'd say. Other stuff happened on the card, pretty unremarkable. You know, the couple of good fighters that we thought might be prospects showed that they were quite interesting. And the Bonfim brothers did some Bonfimming. But I don't expect I'll go long today because not an awful lot happened. But we'll start with the main event because on this card that almost nobody saw, I thought Jared Cannonier gave the performance of his life. He looked really good. I won't say slick because he came out and got clattered early on. But from the start, Jared Cannonier used to be a heavyweight. He was a bit chunkier, but he never looked like he was, Cole Conrad or Romanov or Lewis or Mays or any other of the countless heavyweight fat slobs. He looked like a big dude in a real sense, but then he cut down to light heavyweight and we all went, oh yeah, that makes more sense. And then he said he was going to cut to middleweight. And I remember at the time saying, I think this guy might die. I think he might die cutting to middleweight. And then he made it comfortably, beat the piss out of Dave Branch, beat Jack Hermanson, who was on a really hot streak at the time, and established himself as a middleweight contender. And that was like 7 years ago, I think. But then he came to the center of the cage here against Gregory Rodriguez, Robocop. And I knew Rodriguez was like a big, strong guy. But he towered over Cannonier, and he looked about twice as wide as him. So that dude must cut a lot of weight and do it well. But then cutting weight is a martial art in itself. In fact, I was having a laugh earlier this week because Jared Gordon was booked to fight Mashebjon Ruzebwev, who is the younger brother of Nurzuldan Ruzebwev. These names absolutely sound made up, but I promise they're real people. But the older Ruzebwev, everyone knows for being absolutely enormous at welterweight. He fought Buckley, I believe, at welterweight, and he's like 6'4", not the best fighter in the world, not particularly good, but enormous. So I said coming into this, I know nothing about his brother, but he's definitely got those secret Uzbeki weight-cutting techniques, so expect him to be huge. And he was booked to fight Jared Gordon at lightweight. Photo comes out from his first UFC photo shoot, and he looks like just some guy. It's like he doesn't have a single defined muscle on his body. He's got the sort of slumped, working at a desk all day posture. And I joked that he was the twin made of all the water that Nurzuldan cuts. But we were all having a good laugh about that. Maybe Nurzuldan got all the good genetics for weight cutting. But then the fight was cancelled because Mashebjon, whatever his name is, weight cut complications. So even without a single muscle on his body, with a body that looked like it was made out of water, he couldn't cut enough water to make weight safely. Bizarre. But anyway, we're not talking about the dork brothers of guys who aren't particularly good to begin with. We're talking about Cannonier versus Rodriguez. Rodriguez came out, stalked him a bit, Cannonier stepped in to throw, and Rodriguez countered him. And the first round was marked by a few big counters. So every time Cannonier stepped in, Rodriguez looked to inside slip, and he'd either come back with the left hook or he'd throw the short right hand as he was slipping to his left. He caught him with a left hook and a right straight off the inside slip first and hurt him. And then late in the round, Cannonier came in, tried to throw a right hand at him. Rodriguez slipped to the left and threw his own right hand. Really short right hand. You couldn't even see it live because it was hidden by Cannonier's back. But that hurt him as well, and then they showed the replay and you could see it really clearly. Really short punch, very slick. And then rounds 2, 3, and 4, some of the best work I've seen out of Jared Cannonier ever. I didn't actually listen to what his corner said, but he did absolutely the right thing coming out for round 2. If someone has come out and countered you hard in round 1, and they've shown they can do it a couple of times too, if they've got your timing in round 1, you are being too obvious. So what Jared Cannonier came out and did in the second round was he just pumped out a load of bullshit. Jab from too far away. Jab from too far away, jab from too far away, step up inside, low kick. All the stuff that is very hard to really bite down on and counter. So he's doing that thing where you'll see guys do it sometimes, but they'll throw like jab, right, straight, jab, but way too far out. They're just like miming it in front of your face. And he's miming the jab. He's putting it just in front of Rodriguez's face. He can't quite touch him, but he's doing it like an annoying child going, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And then he steps in on a real jab. And all of that was making Rodriguez really reluctant to step in and try and counter. And then Cannonier started sneaking in better punches as well. The right straight to the body. He was throwing the right straight to the body underneath Rodriguez's counters and underneath Rodriguez's jab. Loved both of those. Right straight to the body is such an underrated punch. It used to be a big scorer in amateur boxing, particularly in the days when they used electronic scoring, which they've moved away from again now. But you had a number of judges, and they press a button when they saw a punch land, and it had to be within X milliseconds. Multiple judges press it to score a punch. So you'd have these Olympic boxing matches where the score would be like 7-3 for a round, and you're like, obviously more than 7 punches landed, but 7 clean, good punches landed that multiple judges acknowledged. And the right straight was really good for that too. But it's always been this punch that's been really big in the amateurs, and then not enough people do it even in boxing, I'm talking about, even not enough people do it in the professional leagues. And in MMA, man, it's like rooster's teeth seeing a good right straight. But the effect of it has always been great for infighters and people who want to step in and get to work with two-handed hitting. It's good as an outfighting punch too. You can throw a right straight and then cut off your combination there. You can pick at people with it like Junior Dos Santos did, and it opens up the chance to throw a big overhand across the top later. But more than that, it really takes it out of people. If you land it as a counter, if the other guy's extending his arm towards you and you punch him in the ribs under the armpit as he's stretching his arm out, you can really start to win them. So it was great seeing Cannonier timing that as a counter. It was good to see him low kicking. I've always thought he had fantastic low kicks, because people always say he's a big hitter, why does he get so few finishes? And I think it's probably because people know that he wants to hit them in the head, so that when he does hurt people, they cover up, they know what to expect. Taking it up and down the body and adding in the leg kicks as well would always be a good choice for him. But if you remember, he TKO'd Anderson Silva with low kicks back in the day, and that was off his lead leg, because Anderson Silva stood southpaw, so he did step up lead leg low kicks to the outside of Anderson Silva's lead leg. And people were so butthurt about that for a while, a lot of sites listed it as TKO injury, leg injury. It's like, no, that's TKO leg kicks, mate. Or TKO low kicks, if we're being real pernickety with the language. There were people out there absolutely convinced that Anderson Silva lost because of the pre-existing injury from the Chris Weidman fight where he snapped his shin. It's like it was the other leg, bruh. But yeah, I'd love to see Cannonier use his low kicks more. The inside low kick I'm going to talk about it a bit today because Yusuf Zalal used it really well. Umar Nurmagomedov used it against Paul Hughes, and I thought that was an interesting contrast because he landed a lot of... Someone was trying to tell me it was the knuckle of the foot. If you connect with like the lower part of your foot on the inside of someone's thigh, you haven't done anything. Guys will take that happily, and it won't really do anything. If you're doing inside thigh kicks, you really need to be connecting with like ankle and up, or else you're just high velocity toe holding yourself. But the inside low kick is a peculiar technique because it's very hard to really hurt someone in the same way as you would with an outside low kick. You kick the outside of someone's leg in their stance. Whether it's a calf kick or a thigh kick, you've got a good chance of buckling their knee in if you catch them when they're not ready for it. And that can really damage a guy's, everything. If you get your knee jarred midway through a fight, it takes a load of power off your punches. It makes it harder for you to finish takedowns. It just makes moving around a lot harder. You kick a guy on the inside of the leg, probably not doing that. And then, of course, the calf kick's available on the outside of the leg because it does hit that peculiar nerve that seems to put people's foot to sleep. Whereas if you kick on the inside of the leg, not only are people's lead foot more turned in naturally a lot of the time, so you kick the shin, but if you kick the shin, you're not really... Tony Ferguson used to kick metal bars and then deliberately kick people in the shin, but it doesn't really do much. You get into those Jackie Chan style fight sequences where you're both just hammering each other shin to shin. But the utility of the inside low kick is that it can mess with people's balance badly. So you can break off the opponent's attacks by giving them a good inside low kick. You can follow up on it quite nicely. A really good one is inside low kick as the opponent steps onto that lead leg, and then trying to either uppercut them or hit them with the right straight as you come back down into your stance. Lots of guys in kickboxing and Muay Thai use it to build, so they go inside low kick, put the foot down behind them, and then throw a high kick immediately. Or as Yusuf Zalal was doing, you throw the inside low kick to step back into southpaw, and then you're setting up whatever you want from southpaw because all the opponent sees is you kick them in the leg and move back. So they're going to follow you and not necessarily take note of the fact that the stance has changed. And then Zalal was using it to try and set up left body kicks and left knees. It's what Alexander Volkanovski does a lot of. If you go read my Advanced Striking 2.0 Alexander Volkanovski, which I think I made free for everyone, but that focused mainly on his use of the inside low kick to set things up, set up stance changes. If you saw him against Yair Rodriguez, it was a step up left low kick. Might have been inside, might have been outside, depending on which stance Rodriguez was standing in. But he step up low kick with the lead leg, put it down behind him. Yair tried to follow him back, and he hit him with a what was now the lead hand southpaw right hook and wobbled him. And then there's a lot of stuff you can set up off the inside low kick because it has a preliminary step. Because you have to take a step up with your back leg first, there's a telegraph. So if you were really worried about like sneaking it in without getting countered, very tricky to do. You'd have to jab and then inside low kick or something like that. But if you show it to the opponent and you say, look, I'm doing this inside low kick, suddenly you've got a trap set where if you step your back foot up and you don't inside low kick and they pick their leg up to check and you just thrust in with a jab from your feet very close together, you make a ton of distance and you just jab through their head. That's what we call a T-step jab. Or Yusuf Zalal was doing it, he'd jab next to the guy's head, Kattar's head, bring his feet together and then step his lead foot behind Kattar's and try and hit that Osatagari trip, or the cross buttock, as they used to call it back in the London prize fight days. So inside low kick, really cool. Not a great hurter, but something that in the course, very easy to defend, but if you bake that into your offense, you can make use of their defense. And if you've got a very aggressive opponent, it works really well as a counter-attack because you can hack their leg out. Especially someone like Rodriguez who just wants to stand in one place and start tearing off punches. If you kick their lead leg out, you get that break to get away. So Cannonier did 2 rounds of excellent work from second round and third round. I quite like Rodriguez's little level changes and things. He was fighting his way back into it. The third round was a bit more Rodriguez-y than the previous one. But round 4, Cannonier comes out, pushes him towards the cage, which is supposed to be Rodriguez's job. You know, I've seen Rodriguez's good fights, and he's backing the dude up the whole time. So in this one, I saw him backing up a lot, and I was like, it's not going as you planned, is it? But he did do a little bit of, like, he'd pursue Cannonier for a bit. And if he didn't like how it was going, he'd take a couple of steps back and Cannonier would come in and he'd try and counter him. And in the first round, that worked really well. There are times where if you're on the front foot, it's okay to come off the front foot to get the opponent opening up. But yeah, fourth round, Cannonier pushes him towards the fence. He goes I think it was right straight to the body, which, you know, would be double good points for me. But he threw a right straight and weaved into the left hook, which is such a good technique, and especially against the fence. I absolutely love it. I believe Nixick calls it the Barao because TJ Dillashaw did it to Henan Barao. I think that was his second fight with Barao. He knocked him out. But right hand lead, or you can go 1-2, but right straight, weave out to your right, take a big step out to your right with your right foot, and throw the left hook. And that was a favorite of Igor Vovchanchin. You can just like cut people down with that. Kyoji Horiguchi, his UFC run, he did a ton of this. He'd go, he burst in with a 1-2 and then he'd weave through into the left hook. Because as soon as the guy throws back, he's opening himself up and you weave under his armpit and you hit him with the left hook as he's out of position. It's a really gorgeous move. Kai Asakura did it to Yuki Matoya in his fight in Rising a year and a bit ago. It works so well. And he followed up with like 3 or 4 punches, chased Rodriguez along the fence and knocked him down and got the finish. I thought this fight was great. Both of them gave a good account of themselves, but especially Cannonier. And I thought it made an interesting contrast with the co-main event where a lot of people mad at Yusuf Zalal. It was sort of a cashing in of his goodwill. Obviously, he's back in the UFC on this is 4th fight in the row? 4th win in a row, rather. 4-fight win streak. Following being cut from the UFC a few years ago and making his way back in. But this reminded me a lot of Mario Batista's situation. Mario Batista was he's still on an incredible run in the UFC bantamweight division. In fact, someone asked me a few weeks before he met Aldo, who would you say is like the most guaranteed fun fighter in the UFC? And I said, of course, Charles Oliveira, number 1, but underrated, Mario Batista. Every fight he comes to kick ass, does creative things. He's smashing people's noses open with shoulder strikes. And then he fights Jose Aldo, all-time great. Old man, but all-time great. And he shits the bed and he holds him against the fence doing nothing. And I went, oh no, I just told everyone that that's the most exciting guy in the UFC that's not Charles Oliveira. That's what I kind of feel like happened with Zalal here. I mean, I never said he was super exciting, but I think people were rooting for him. And this performance was simultaneously impressive and frustrating for a lot of fans because he jabbed Calvin Kattar's face into a mess. But then the third round, he basically spent jogging around the cage. And it also sort of upset people more that the fact that anytime there was an exchange, he won it anyway, which makes people go, push your advantages, try and get a finish, try and get a knockdown, try and show us that, you can beat these old names in convincing, well, it was convincing fashion, but in like dominating fashion. However, I will say 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's Calvin Kattar's job to make the fight, particularly once he's lost 2 rounds. It's not Yusuf Zalal's job to be interesting. His job is to protect the paycheck that he's winning. You don't want to go out on your shield in the 3rd round if you already won the first 2. Calvin Kattar's an odd one. Someone was joking that he made the classic error of going to TriStar late in his career to revitalise it. But his footwork's always been a bit of a problem for him. You'll remember Renato Moicano. Kattar's supposed to be a very good kickboxer. And Renato Moicano, who's not a striker, first and foremost, but he worked out every time Kattar stepped forward to punch, he did a big step onto his lead leg, and he just timed him with low kicks. One of the great counter-low kicking performances of the last few years. And Kattar ends up mid-fight trying to invent a way of getting his hands onto Moicano's chin without putting his foot close enough to. So he's like falling over himself, trying to like throw punches and lean forward. But it's interesting because I started making a little Filthy Casuals guide this week and then I gave up because I couldn't be bothered and I'd already written that Drickus article and stuff. But I started to make a Filthy Casuals guide to his use of the Switch 45, which is a footwork technique against Giga Chikadze. It's a little stance switch that takes you off to one side first and then brings you back in. And he used it against Chikadze because Chikadze wants to step back into southpaw from his orthodox stance, and then he wants you to walk towards him, and he times you with the body kick coming in. And he calls it the Giga kick, and none of us agree. But if you watch the Kattar Chikadze fight, Kattar starts every round doing this, coming across the cage doing this, but any time that he's chasing Chikadze and he thinks Chikadze's going to change stances as he moves back, he does a little step to the side and steps through into the opposite stance, putting his back into the path of the kick rather than the open side, which is the more vulnerable side. And what it allowed him to do was to keep walking forward and poking with southpaw jabs and orthodox jabs, depending on which stance he was in, but keep Chikadze moving. So Chikadze lands about as many strikes as Kattar in that fight, if you watch it again. It's not like an arse whooping by Kattar, but he looks so bad because he gets so tired. He's trying to jog out the side door and set up big kicks, and Calvin Kattar's just getting up in his face going, no, I'm not allowing you to do that. So by the end, Giga's swinging wildly off balance and ducking his head down and breathing out his arse. And Kattar's still looking in quite good condition and just poking him and walking forwards and then hitting him with some counter elbows, which were really nice too. But in that fight, he just keeps jogging up to Chikadze. His job isn't to cut the cage, it's to get in Chikadze's face and make Chikadze move until Chikadze's tired. This was a fight against a guy who was using lateral move. I mean, firstly, it was a 3-round fight rather than a 5-round fight, but it was a fight against a guy who's going to jab and move laterally. He isn't waiting to... Well, I mean, he did try and land a couple of body kicks at some point, but he wasn't... His whole game plan wasn't to walk Kattar onto body kicks. His plan was to poke and get away. So Kattar walking up to him again and again, not cutting the ring effectively, did nothing. And then as Kattar starts to try and cut the ring more effectively, try and step across, which in itself is... The whole thing here is that you've got to accept that you're going to get jabbed. Cutting the ring is taking up space. Cutting the ring is using your physical presence to get in the way of someone. So if you start like flinching as soon as you're in a trade or cutting the trade off and be like, oh, I don't want to be in the trade, there was no point cutting the ring in the first place. But Kattar was trying to cut the ring with just pure straight hitting, and it just doesn't work. Because one of the ways you deal with straight punching is to move laterally. Because there's a great chance that you just drift past it. So Kattar keeps doing this thing where he like the stepping right hook from orthodox. So step through and throw the right hook is a fantastic ring cutting weapon. I want you to go and watch like round 2 and 3 of this fight. It's a fantastic ring cutting weapon if you do it in the right way. So that when they're in front of you at 12 o'clock and they start circling to your right, you step out at 45 degrees to your right and throw the right hook so that they run onto it. And you're not going to hit them, probably. You're going to hit their guard. The idea is to force them to cover up and then throw more punches or a knee or a kick or whatever. But instead, Kattar gets him towards the cage. Zalal starts circling. He steps towards where Zalal is, not where he's going to be. And he throws a right straight from southpaw. And Zalal just circles off, scot-free. We sometimes called it herding strikes back in the day when I was writing articles about this stuff, but when you want to cut the ring on someone, the first strike is a throwaway anyway. You expect them to block it, because blocking a strike is like a level down defense-wise from just avoiding it and being out of the way. You've already accomplished something by making them stand there and block, and then you follow up. So a great ring-cutting weapon is the round kick, which Kattar didn't throw at all. He was trying straight teeps. Again, straight strikes at a circling opponent. But if the guy's circling on the cage to your right, you throw the right round kick to the head or the body. It hits them in the arm, but it stands them still for a second. And then you start swinging. Someone's moving out to your left. You pivot and you throw a wide left hook. And it doesn't get them on the chin most of the time, but then you keep throwing because you've got them standing there blocking. Kenny Weldon used to have a really good drill for this, which was like he'd have a focus, he'd have his focus mitts on, and he'd walk around one way around his boxer, and then the other way, and then he'd hold up his glove as he walked one way, and he'd say 2, 3, 4, and that wasn't the punch, that was the number of punches he wanted. So they'd go left hook, right hook, or left hook, right hook, left hook, left hook, right hook, left hook, right. The number of punches that he said. But always the first punch had to be catching him as he was moving towards that direction. It's a really good drill. Go find some of Kenny Weldon's old instructional material. He did an instructional where he talked about headbutting people, and they decided it was unbecoming of a great coach to be talking about headbutting people in a boxing match. So they just left the footage in and cut the audio. It's really funny. And then the audio comes back in and he's saying, if he's taking food off my table, I'm gonna... And then they cut the audio again. And then they move on to the next topic. But yeah, Kenny Weldon, look him up. Really good boxing coach who put out some great instructional material. But yeah, this fight was frustrating because Calvin Kattar... These are not weapons that Calvin Kattar doesn't have. It's that Calvin Kattar was busy doing something else that didn't work. Calvin Kattar can throw a right high kick. Well, the stepping right hook is one that he was getting wrong, but Calvin Kattar can throw a right round kick. Calvin Kattar can throw a wide left hook, and he just wasn't. He was just throwing straight punches at a guy who was circling side to side. And then the third round, there's a moment where he catches him along the fence, and Zalal stands there, and they stare at each other for about 5 seconds, and I'm like Krusty the Clown going,
He's spinning the ball on his finger! Just take it! Take the ball!
But in terms of what Zalal did, the jab into the inside low kick, the jab to the calf kick, and the jab into the step-up attempt at the trip. Is it an Osotogari if you go really low down the leg? It's just a trip over the leg. It's cool because Zabit Magomed Sharipov was the first sort of guy to really make it catch on or make people pay attention to it. Piotr Yan started using it shortly after. John Jones did it to Stipe Miocic most recently. But it's a great technique. In judo, you don't see that many Osotogaris because you've got to step across the guy to do it. And if he's not off balance, you're off balance. Because if your lead leg is behind their lead leg, positionally, it's the same as if you're not off balance, if neither person's off balance. But if you set it up in a striking exchange through getting the guy to pick his leg up and check things, it becomes a really strong throw. So it's another one of those techniques that really, it doesn't only exist in MMA, but it works best in MMA because MMA is the sport where you can get people checking kicks, but you can also grapple and follow them to the floor. And if you listen to my really old history episodes from back in the day about the early days of the London prize ring, you'll know that the cross buttock throw was how Robert Whittaker, not our Robert Whittaker, but a different Robert Whittaker, beat the Venetian gondolier in one of the first international prize fights. So what else was on this card? Edmund Shabazian knocked out a guy who was a bit of a gimme. I don't think we need to talk about this one that much because it was just like... This just felt like Dana White is still friends with Ronda Rousey because Ronda Rousey, I think she's still managing Shabazian. Because I mean, Edmund Shabazian is a bit... I don't want to say washed, but he never really arrived as he was supposed to. Ismail Bonfim actually looked great against Nazim Sadikov, and then Sadikov timed him with a question mark kick. It was a very weird response from Bonfim because he dived towards where he thought the body kick was. Offensively, he'd looked great, but as soon as Sadikov looked like he was throwing the body kick, Bonfim went both hands, oh no! Trying to think of some good ones. Mark Coleman versus Petey Williams, Bisping versus Rockhold, Bisping versus Belfort. But the Belfort-Bisping one, Belfort had kicked him in the body a few times first. This one, there wasn't an awful lot of build-up. Sadikov was on the losing end of most of the striking, and then he just threw this up, and Bonfim dived into it, and it hurt Bonfim's eye, Round continued. Bonfim got hit a bit. Doctor came in at the end of the round. Apparently, people were saying in Portuguese, he said, the doctor said, "Can you see?" He said, "Yes." And then the doctor said, "Out of your right eye?" And he said, "Oh, no, not out of my right eye." It's like, no, bro, what are you doing? You can't say that. I think he just slipped up in the moment, because every fighter knows that if you say you can't see out of one eye, they're going to stop the fight. But he didn't seem like he wanted out of there. And of course, you lose half your money if you do. So just a reckless slip up on his part. This is why in all matters, when you're talking to anyone with any degree of authority who can do something to your life, say as little as possible. It's Shut the Fuck Up Friday on the Jack Slack podcast. One of the ones we expected to be good was Jose Delgado versus Conor Matthews. I'd seen Delgado on the Contender Series. He looked fun. This one was a classic example of that principle I always say, if both guys are switching stances, the fight becomes a chaotic mess. Because guys who like to switch stance, they know what they're going to throw, and they're the moving part, they're the changing part in the fight. It's their opponent's job to try and keep up. But if both people start switching stances, it's very hard to know for sure what you're going to need to throw. If you're unfamiliar with fighting, there's an open stance, there's a closed stance, which is when you're both orthodox or you're both southpaw, and there's an open stance, which is when one of you is southpaw and one of you is orthodox. And switch hitters tend to function on the idea that they will be either in the open stance or closed stance situation, and there's different things that are available more easily from each dynamic. If the other guy starts switching stances as well, you've got a very small window in which to work out which stance they're in, which stance you're in, and what you're throwing. So a great example is O'Malley versus Vera 1. Chito Vera doesn't really land an awful lot, but he just walks at him changing stances constantly, and Sean O'Malley is really weirded out by it. And they're fighting in the very small cage too, which really helps. If you watch the rematch, they are like the cage is enormous, and Chito Vera is just like, I've got no chance here, and stands there getting hit for 5 rounds. But Delgado hit him with a nice overhand and knocked him down midway through the first round. Looked really good. They were doing one of those inspirational stories on commentary about how Conor Matthews has to train in his mother's basement. And you're going, this is such a weird sport. Any other sport would be ashamed to tell people about this. Any other professional sport would probably be like paying Conor Matthews to get his own gym. But that's MMA, baby. Gabriel Bonfim's win over Chaos Williams was pretty good. Honestly, the thing that I noticed in both the Bonfim-Williams fight and the Elijah Smith-Vince Morales fight, guys going for darts looking for the short-arm darts, like Islam does, and then both of them giving it up and going to the full darts. Because I've been playing with it since I've seen Islam doing it. You get the darts and you grip your forearm instead of your bicep. And the way that I've found the most success is to grab it quick and then to fall onto their head and pull their shoulder up into their neck. But I'm out here getting gym taps, and these guys are fighting professional fighters who do not want to give up half their purse. So they're trying it, and then they're going, fuck it, I'll finish it properly, and they punch their arm all the way through. And Vince Morales actually almost hit it might be a German necktie, it might be a caveman necktie, but it's a weird step over choke where you put your knee on the back of their neck. Basically there's the Japanese necktie, which is legit, and then there's all the other neckties, which are kind of bullshit subs that sometimes work. But I thought that fight between Elijah Smith and Vince Morales was good fun. I felt for Vince Morales because he lost, but he did a good amount of damage in the first round. He did good work looking for submissions in the second and third. But Smith looked good. Vince Morales didn't look bad for a guy who was like 16-8, and Elijah Smith looked decent for a guy who's just coming in and on the way up. So that was the card. It was pretty mid. I might be saying this to no one because these Apex cards no one cares about. But if you haven't watched any of it, I would highly recommend you watch the main event. It's really good. And maybe the Delgado fight. The Zalal fight was technically very pretty, but it was absolutely one of those fights you would describe as not getting out of first gear. Right, that'll do us for today. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon to get all the extra stuff and go read the Drickus versus Sean Strickland breakdown. Send your emails to jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. and see what I'm writing at fightprimer.com. Remembering that Calvin Kattar is the reason that we started talking about best boxer in the UFC, baby. To begin with, bless.